Let's jump right in. So what we're going to talk about today is the meeting of the waters, which is really the broad theme of this overall event. And we're going to discuss what does it take and what's happening in the industry as we're watching this market evolve. And I think if all of you may feel like this, you're standing here on the beach and you see this massive tsunami that's about to wash over the shores of every society, every economy worldwide. And that's actually, the water's already there. And as these waters will start to recede from your societies, from your economies, you're going to realize the topology of the landscape and the way you conduct to do business and the way you interact with people will be forever changed. Now, the tsunami alarm for this phenomenon went off actually well over 100 years ago. In the United States in 1890, Chief Justices Warren and Brady stood up and they said, well, wait a minute, these newfangled technologies that have been brought into the marketplace, namely the camera and the audio recording machine, have the potential of significantly impacting our privacy. They have the potential, for instance, of capturing our likeness in public spaces and then having that show up in the newspaper tomorrow. And that could be problematic for some. And so that's for the first time in the United States where they actually established this concept, this legal concept of the right to privacy. That was later evolved in the 1928 or so when Chief Brandeis continued going on, Justice Brandeis continued with the concept of the right to be left alone. So this idea that we have this concept, this right to privacy has been, in at least the United States, has been evolving for quite some time. Now, let's consider and look at this evolution and how this evolved. So around 1890 to around 1990, we're in this, what I'll call the wave one of this idea of our right to privacy. And I'm going to call this the Internet 0.0 stage. Right? We're still thinking about this idea. Now, there was a gentleman by the name of Vannevar Bush, who in 1945 came up out of World War II. He was a data scientist in the war, and he said, wouldn't that be really cool if we had this concept of a mimic machine, this memory machine that would allow us to be in control of all of our digital assets and all of our digital concepts. And that image there is a diagram of his mimic machine where he was thinking about people should have the ability to collect all of their information about themselves and the things that are reading and what they're doing, and to be able to physically interact with the device, but also wirelessly interact with the device. And he wrote that paper in 1946. Then fast forward around 1990, and we're starting to get now what I'll call the Internet 1.0 stage. And Internet 1.0, we're moving into the academic and more theoretical concepts of how we actually can start taking control and ownership of our personal data and identity. And that image you see there is from a concept by a gentleman named Kenneth Loudon in 1996, who proposed this idea of the National Information Exchange Marketplace. And Loudon was saying that people should be in control of their data, and there should be a data bank to which they should be able to deposit their data like they can deposit their money, and then facilitate that national information exchange. Now, in 1973, there was a guy named Alan Weston, too, who was preparing for Alan Ware, who was preparing for the 1974 Privacy Protection Act. And at that time, he was also saying, wait a minute, people should actually have an ombudsman, a representative, to help them protect themselves as they interact with these digital worlds that are out there. But we don't have the technology to do that, so we're going to park that for now. So again, the evolution of what we've been talking about and what Andrew was just speaking about has actually been coming on for quite some time. Then we get into the wave 3. And wave.3 is where we start building the technologies around how do we do all of these capabilities. And this is when the World Economic Forum, and actually it was the EU commissioner in 2009 came up and said, this idea, personal data is the new black gold. Personal data is an economic asset. Personal data is a currency. And the World Economic Forum actually wrote a paper on that in 2011, talking about personal data as the new economic asset class. And we'll be talking about this. We have somebody from the World Economic Forum speaking tomorrow as well, so it's going to be really interesting to see the evolution of their discussions from there. And then we think about, okay, that's wave 2.0. And this is where we're now into the Internet 2.0 platform, the API idea. So we're building all of this technology into the cloud. We're opening up these APIs that are allowing our data to interact between different systems throughout the world, much of what Andrew was just speaking about. And now we're entering into wave 4. And wave 4 is the entry into what I'm calling the personal data and identity meeting of the waters. It's where, for the first time, starting around 2020, we're having the traditional organizational-centric approaches to personal data and identity management that have been evolving for well over 100 years. now meeting with this new people-centric approach to which Andrew so eloquently was talking about just before. This idea that we should be, as individuals, having self-sovereign control over our personal data and our identity, to be able to granularly pick and choose who gets to see it and when. And this is really characterized as the Internet 3.0. You might also hear this as Web 3.0. It's really the tokenization of the Internet. It's this idea that we can start cryptographically controlling elements of our data. Some of those elements are credentials. Other elements of data can also be considered. And then whoever holds that cryptographic key has the ability to choose the who, what, when, where, for what purpose, and why that information is being used. So within that backdrop, and you think about how we've been evolving over the last 130 years or so, we've now reached this grand awakening. So Dario had mentioned earlier that the MEF has been working on a trust study. We've just about to drop the 8th annual trust study, thanks to Assurant over there, who's been underwriting that study for the last 4 years. And 4 years ago, when we were looking at that study, we witnessed this grand awakening, where people, for the first time in the 8 years of this study going on, woke up and said, well, wait a minute. I'm starting to have a problem with a little bit of what's going on in the marketplace right now. I'm concerned by it. And what we've started to realize is that we've become phygital beings. We are not just physical anymore. We are not just digital anymore. We're rather phygital. And in that phygital being, what we're realizing is that our economic self, actually our digital self, may very well have more value to society than our physical self in many contexts. If we don't have that digital presence, we don't exist. And so we need to be thinking about how do we actually navigate this so we can actually have digital inclusion throughout society. And what we need to realize is our digital self actually starts about 6 to 8 weeks from conception. That first time mom goes to the doctor's office and the doctor says, hey, you know what? You got a baby in there. Well, guess what? In this digital world, you are now starting your digital footprint. And that digital footprint will grow exponentially throughout your entire life and carry on after your death. Now, what we also need to realize is by 2025, it's estimated that we will be interacting with an IoT device 4,800 times a day. You wake up in the morning, you walk out on the street, you go to your job, you interact. So nearly every 13 to 18 seconds of every moment of every day, you will be leaking your data and your identity out there into the world. And the question is, how do we start managing that? And as people become more and more aware of this, as they become more and more awakening to this, they are getting increasingly more concerned because they're getting concerned by the hackers, the spammers, the leakers, the unknowns that they are unaware of what's happening out there in the market. But you as businesses should also be concerned because in this awakening, people are starting to say, wait a minute. These old legacy business models aren't really standing up anymore, and I'm having a problem with it. I want to actually have a seat at the table and participate with this. And the signs are everywhere that these signals are starting to take root. They're happening as we see the deprecation of device ID tracking. They're happening as we're watching the death of the cookies. They're happening as we see trillions of dollars lost to fraud and other examples out there in the market. And when we think about how do we wrap our heads around this and understand what's happening in the marketplace, we need to kind of understand this keyword soup that we're seeing out there when we're looking at digital identity. We need to think about the primary actors that are out there in the market. The actors are individuals, enterprises, and public institutions. And individuals aren't just people. Individuals are also enterprises. Individuals are also public institutions like governments. Individuals are also our things. Our smart things are starting to get their own identities and will start making autonomous decisions on our behalf. And these are some of the things that we need to think about as we're going to be navigating into society. What we also need to realize too is that as we think about this idea of personal data and identity, we need to understand what these things are. I actually don't believe there's a thing called identity. I believe there's a thing called identity management. And identity management is about the ability to manage those unique identifiers to which Andrew was just talking about just briefly, and that's the role of identity. Everything else is personal data, and we'll be able to talk about that at some length. Now, what are you seeing here? And I'm going to start putting the context of what you're going to be learning over the next 2 days. This is a satellite aerial view of the Amazon River, and what you're experiencing is this black river, the Rio Negro, meets up with the Amazon River. And when the two rivers meet, they don't actually merge, and it takes nearly 6 kilometers or 3.7 miles for the two rivers to come back together. And this is what it looks like. And the reason why they don't merge is they have different speeds, temperatures, and densities. And that's the exact same thing that's happening in society today. We have these traditional organizational-centric approaches to personal data and identity management, which are characterized by another MEF study, by the way, that was just put out. I encourage you to go download it on the Enterprise Sun, where worldwide enterprises are saying, yeah, I get it, this GDPR stuff and all that, that's great. But you know, at the end of the day, I own the data. So the primary mode of the enterprise-centric approach is that personal data is an economic asset for the enterprise, or it's a social engineering tool to dictate where society is going to go. And this is characterized by also they're looking to do value creation for their own business, marketing, customer experience, operational efficiencies, and fraud detection. That's what's driving the enterprise organizational approach. But the other approach that's just starting to emerge, and the river's coming together around 2020, is this people-centric approach, this idea that people should be able to have their data as a human right or as a social commons that can help make society a better place. It's driven by agency and autonomy and self-determination and dignity and inclusion. And there are many factors that we need to be thinking through as we go through all of these elements. And I'm not going to be able to go through all of this now, but I'm going to give you some highlights. First, there's the technology. We just look at this idea of this personal data store, or the death of the password, or any number of these different concepts that we've been technically looking at. This is just the lit review of everything that we've been talking about that are enabling people to be in control of their personal data. Then you can look at the economics of personal data and identity and aggregate it up across all of the micro industries that actually make personal data possible. This is a multi-trillion-dollar annual opportunity for the world's economies. Then you can also look at it from a regulatory perspective. And what's critically important for us to learn is this is a world of ands, not ors. It's not just a matter of enterprise as an asset or social engineering or human right or community resources, aka social commons. It's this idea that all of these different philosophies to which we use and manage personal data and identity in societies all work simultaneously in every country. So for example, in the United States, we're primarily an enterprise asset-oriented group, but in California with CCPA, we now have the human rights element. We're now getting commons elements, but we also have the social engineering tool called the credit score. Whereas in China, you have primarily leaning to social engineering through the China credit scoring system, but then they also have the other elements going through. So when you're looking at a marketplace, you want to be considering all of these different philosophies and approaches that are applying to personal data in a particular market, and you want to see which one is primarily dominant versus the other ones. Then you have this idea of culture and the privacy elements. So what does privacy really mean? And privacy is about the ability to have for the individual to be in control of the who, what, when, where, for what purpose their personal information is used. You then have this idea of trust, which is very different than privacy. And privacy aligns with trust because I have faith that the security and systems will keep my data secure, but there's also a government system, that ombudsman I represented, that will talk to me earlier. But now what's interesting about what's evolving in this market is now combine this undercurrent factor with the technology. The verified credentials to which Andrew was just speaking about will actually allow us to cryptographically systemize trust into the marketplace. Because I no longer just have to rely on companies and people to do the right thing, but because my data is cryptographically protected under my control, I can now systemize trust into the market. Now, other things that we need to realize is this idea of politics. So how do we then make all of this happen as another undercurrent factor that's going to help us stitch these rivers together over time? And we have a choice to make as a society. We can either allow the organizational approach to completely dilute the people-centric approach, i.e. don't let the waters merge. At which point, I believe we're going to end up in a massive dystopia where Orwell was actually going to be considered an optimist. Right, where we have absolutely no control whatsoever. Or we can strive for some utopia where the self-sovereign identity approach takes total control and dilutes the organizational-centric approach. But I don't think that utopia can be sustainable because organizations do need data. They do need, there are specific citizen level, governmental level, and enterprise needs for having this data. And then ultimately, I believe we need to, and this is, I'm going to express my opinion, we need to split the difference and find this middle ground. And I call that middle ground the identity nexus. That identity nexus is an equilibrium state where we can find that risk-reward balance ratio for the exchange of personal data and identity in the marketplace. And I believe this is the formula. You essentially say the value risk-to-reward ratio for the individual, the enterprise, and the public institution, plus a social good, minus any negative externalities, will achieve some equilibrium state in society. And very much similar to Oliver Williamson's transactional cost theory in the 70s, who he later won a Nobel Prize for, I believe the person that can solve this formula will win the next Nobel Prize. Because when we do that, we'll be able to effectively create an equilibrium state in society where the value of our personal data and identity is well established. Now, how do you achieve this as a business? I believe you need to focus on what I call the connectivity keystone strategy, where you connect with people, you communicate with them, you conduct commerce, and you do so consistently with transparency and choice and everything that Andrew was just speaking about. Now, in traditional old world models, you talk about the advertising rented audience model, and then you move people over into your own audience model. And there's something that needs to strategically change in this discussion, is we're no longer talking about owned audiences, but verified individuals. Individuals that have come to you with choice and consent and informed consent. And in that process, using this verified credential model that Andrew was talking about, I actually believe the next generation metric for most businesses is going to be how many number of verified credential connections do I have with my business. It's no longer going to be reportable of like, I've got 1 million email addresses or I've got so many phone numbers. I don't care about any of that. What I want to know is how many people have actually connected with me through a verified credential and maintained that connection with me, because that will truly show informed choice. And there are other strategies that you'll hear about tomorrow and throughout the rest of the show, not just through the DID model to which Andrew was talking about, but there are other players that will show you the alternative approaches to achieving that same thing. So going forward in the future, let's take a lesson from Darwin. It's not the strongest of the species that survives, nor the most intelligent, but those are most responsive to change. And your business will be shaped by your ability to serve the connected individual and on the individual's terms. And your career will be shaped by your ability to adapt and learn to all of the changes that we're seeing this as we look to navigate the waters. Now, I've got a book coming out in July that's talking about all of these different aspects. Everyone here will get a free copy of that book. So if you want to scan the code, go for it. And I'll give you one when it comes out. And for that, thank you very much.
Thank you, Michael. Again, 5 minutes or so for questions, but I'm just going to ask a quick one. So I'm very pleased to be hosting this event because I find this whole topic fascinating. And it probably goes back to about 6 or 7 years ago. I was invited to Helsinki for the My Data conference. I'm not sure if you've been to that.
Many times.
Yeah. And it sort of blew my mind, this idea of you take control of your personal data, you share it with brands you trust on your terms. That helps the consumer, but it also helps the enterprises because, as you just alluded to in your last few slides, they get the chance to personalize their relationships with opted-in, enthusiastic customers. And then I read Doc Searle's book. I'm sure you've read it.
The Attention Economy, yeah.
Yeah, The Attention Economy, which I recommend to everybody here. And I just thought, this is going to change the world. And here we are, and it hasn't happened yet. So why do you think that is?
Because we're just at the very beginning of the meeting of the waters. And much like in the Amazon River, that's why I use that analogy, is the properties are so different. The waters have not yet merged. And it's taking time for those pieces to come together. So that's the reason why. I think the other reason you'll hear from Julian Ranger tomorrow and others in the panel, and Andrew alluded to this already, we've yet to provide people with reasons for change, right? And what will make it easier for me? What value am I getting from changing my current behaviors? Because change is difficult. Yeah. So I think we need to do a better job as an industry to provide those value propositions. The other big change too is the big tech companies, the Googles, the Apples of the world. They don't want us to change. Because if the second you do that, you start eroding their business models and their well-established multi-billion-dollar industries. So I think it's going to take time for that, to come together.
No, I know you don't have a crystal ball, but what do you think that change will look like? Because obviously we need an underlying sort of infrastructural change, and maybe Web3 is part of that. But do you think it will take a sort of clever startup to come and change everybody's mind, or will it be more, top down? I mean, how do you think?
Well, we have all of those clever startups out there. And Andrew already brought it up too. The IATA program, just for those people that are aware of it, the IATA program is the International Travel Association's platform for you to be able to manage your COVID credential managing. Yeah. That's happening at scale globally. So I think that's a really important thing. I think the other element too is what we need to be doing is giving value to individuals and saying, oh, by the way, the subset of this is you're now in control of your data. And so you'll hear tomorrow from Assurant, for example. Well, they'll be and they have a booth as well that will be showing a tool called Pocket Geek Privacy that shows that. But Data Swift will be here talking about those types of capabilities too. Right. So I think it's just a matter of incrementally bringing that into the market and helping people understand it and get that value.
And what do you think will flip people towards thinking this way? Will it be fear because the data leaks and the kind of capital surveillance economy, or will it be more utility and what they can get from it.
Yeah, ultimately it's going to be utility because fear is not sustainable. We can do fear for just so long and then we'll get just tired of it. I mean, we have a thing called the privacy paradox that's been shown, and we will always forego our privacy and security for that short-term value and convenience. Yeah. And that's actually rooted in our genetics and how we've evolved as people. I think over time what will end up happening is we'll see increasingly more and more value. I think one key thing that we need to realize is a lot of people say, well, what does it mean to be in control of my data? Me being in control of my data doesn't mean that you don't have it as an enterprise. What it means is I have a data set that I'm in control of. And over time, my data set will become incrementally more and more important to me. And I may choose to never exchange that data set with anybody because it may just, very similar to what Ben and our Bush envisioned, that data set just may be good for me. Yeah. Or that data set, Liz Brandt from Control Shift will be here tomorrow, and they did some wonderful research that talked about how just having certain elements of this type of data can be significantly beneficial for mental health. They realized just 3 data points, the amount of sleep you're getting, the amount of people you interact with, and the financial stress you're under can be a 6-month predictor to you running into a psychological crisis. And so there's no need for anyone else in the industry to know that. But if I could be tracking those 3 data points for myself, that may be able to help forestall mental health problems down the road.
Yeah, I mean, I heard that, and then my first thought was, well, what if an insurance company gleans that information and decide not to insure you? So there's always the flip side.
But that's why we've got to cryptographically control it.
Yeah.
Right? Because that's, so that whole idea, if you noticed on what builds trust, the old world model, the organizational-centric model of trust was built around faith. And this ombudsman approach that I would hope that the government would be properly representing or holding those other ones accountable. Right. Unfortunately, I think one of the things we're going to have to really realize is the government's going to have to increasingly do its job. And I think over the last 20, 30 years or more, we've leaned more towards supporting the big tech and enterprise. We've been shying away from actually really holding enterprise to task for the fear of stymieing innovation.
Yeah.
Well, at some point, we've got to, do the right thing and protect the citizens. So I think, as Andrew was pointing out, I think regulation is absolutely critical if we're going to, properly scale this business. But even then, when we get the cryptographic control over our data, I now have got 2 points of trust, both the oversight from the regulatory bodies, but also, hey, I don't care. I can lose my laptop today. It's fine because it's all encrypted and no one can do anything with it. Right. So that's going to be the same approach that I think will go in the future.
Okay. I've got time for one question from the audience, if there is one. Or Dario? Do we have one? Yeah. Lee again.
I don't want to dominate the microphone, but that's Lee Suker from Cinch. Do you think that there's an over-reliance on cryptography and not enough reliance on legislation in order to reach this new nexus that you talk about, Michael?
Yeah, I think that's kind of the point I was trying to make at the end. You absolutely need both. The technology alone is not going to cut it. You also need, and regulation alone is not going to cut it. I mean, one of the things we just saw in the UK is, a year or two after the introduction of GDPR, people increasingly reported back, I have more control of my data. But if you look at and Craig and Barbara are going to be reporting on this tomorrow. If you look at the numbers today, that's in the UK at least, has gone, they now think the exact opposite. So I think there's, it's more than just regulation, it's more than just technology, it's also education, it's also guidance, it's also support. And I think following on this last point, it's providing people utility. I mean, that's really what we need to be doing, is making sure that they can get through their day and have a happy life and, feel included and not, excluded. And so that's more than just regulations and technology. It's all of these factors.
Okay, Dario, so
we have one
you're
question,
representing the online community here.
Exactly. We have a question from Joseph Spear for Michael. How did you arrive at your identity nexus equation, please?
That's a good question. Again, I'm not a mathematician, so if any mathematicians out there, please call me out on it and write the formula correctly. But if I looked at it, it starts with what value am I getting and what risk am I taking to achieve that value? And then as I was considering it, okay, so the individual has a value to risk reward ratio, the enterprise has a value to risk reward ratio, and public institutions do as well. So each of the individual institutional groups have that same ratio, but then the society as a whole will benefit from social goods. So for example, data being used to improve education, smart cities, farming, all of that, we can achieve tremendous social good from that data, but at the same time, there's negative externalities like the Amazon cardboard tax or the HelloFresh cardboard tax that we don't really consider when we're getting all these mail packages into our houses. So there's some negative externalities that we need to account for in the model as well. Add all that up, you get some balance. Right now, I believe there isn't an equilibrium state, and the big tech corporations are getting the lion's share of the value, with the individual taking a larger share of the risk. So I think we need to find a way to balance that out.
Okay, great. Well, I'm going to leave Michael on stage because he's going to be talking. He talked about the organization-centric approach and the benefits to enterprises of all of this new technology. So we're pleased to have Adrian from Skechers to represent a brand. And so I'm going to leave Michael to have a conversation with Adrian.
Perfect. Thank you. Adrian, you're up.